Welcome back. I hope you have had the opportunity to watch the first video where I introduced political caricatures and the tools that artists use to convey their messages and ideas to their audience. In this video, I'll talk about how cartoons from the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic eras were created and distributed. I'll talk a little bit about censorship, and I'll show you a fascinating artifact from our collection. And if you stick with me to the end, you'll learn the story of the first woman who was paid to be a scientist. Political caricatures and cartoons are tied to the technology that is available to create them and to distribute them. During this time period, most caricatures were etchings or engravings printed and sold as individual sheets in print shops like the one shown here. It was time-consuming to create the engravings or etchings. The paper and ink was relatively expensive, and the process was black and white. Color had to be added by hand to each individual print. Also, the print runs are relatively small. Each plate could only make several hundred prints. Because of this, caricatures were relatively expensive to publish and were generally only available and affordable to the upper and middle classes. However, people who couldn't afford them could view them in the print shop window. And not only do we have caricatures that show this phenomenon, but we also have some contemporary accounts. On our way back to the hotel, we saw a large crowd that had gathered in front of a shop in the Strand. The meeting was a noisy one, and the agitation suggested that some people were actually boxing. We soon learned that a new caricature was the reason for all the upheaval. What a triumph for the artist. And this is from a letter from 1802. If people are struggling in France to preserve their belongings and persons from the Corsican agitator, people are fighting over here to be the first to see caricatures by Gilray in M. Ackerman's shop window. I cannot describe the enthusiasm when a new print is published. It is almost madness. People box their way through the crowd, and I am told that batches of these are shipped out of the country every day. So there's also contemporary evidence to show that British cartoons were shipped to the continent, including France, and that people purchased them there as well. Besides print shop windows, if you couldn't afford to purchase these caricatures, you might see them in a pub or a club or another public place. You also would be able to rent a folio of caricatures for the evening. So we have evidence here. The printer has indicated on the print itself that folios of caricatures could be lent out. And this would be for perhaps an evening's entertainment if you were having people over and you would enjoy looking through some of the caricatures. So the examples I've shown so far were all created in England and Great Britain. Why is that? There certainly were caricatures printed in other countries, and our collection focuses more on English language materials, but also there were a lot fewer caricatures created. And the reason for that was, of course, censorship by the government. As you can imagine, the royalty and clergy and politicians did not like to be made fun of. In England, printing was heavily censored by either the monarchy or the parliament until 1695, when the House of Commons, exercising the new power it gained during the Glorious Revolution, refused to renew the act that allowed for the search, seizure, and destruction of printed materials critical of the government, and for the arrest and imprisonment of their writers and publishers. So not only would your caricatures that were critical of the government be destroyed, but you also might be sent to prison or fined. So by the time of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic era, British cartoonists had enjoyed a long tradition of being able to satirize and ridicule their political leaders. This is an example from 1763, William Hogarth, who's considered the father of modern caricature, making fun of John Wilkes. And of course, the kings of England and other members of the royal family also came in for their share of ridicule. This is from 1823. You can also see some of the symbolism in this cartoon that we talked about in the last video, the guillotine there and the Phrygian cap. The idea that people could criticize the king or the government, either in text or in images, without fear of being arrested or fined, took hold in England and ultimately ended up in our First Amendment to our Constitution in 1791, which ensures us the right to free speech and freedom of the press from government censorship. But the freedom that caricaturists and press enjoyed in England and in the US was actually pretty rare at the time. In Europe, censorship was much more overt throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. There was a brief period of press freedom in the early part of the French Revolution, but that was quickly squelched, and Napoleon, as you might imagine, did not allow it. So prints were made in secret and circulated clandestinely. They did not have the print shops with caricatures displayed in the windows that you see in England. So now I want to talk about an artifact called the Hale scrapbook, and this is one of my favorite items in our collection. It's one of the oldest and also one of the largest. In fact, this is a picture of me when I was much younger to give you an example of the scale of the book. It was created in England and sometime between about 1746 and 1830. The scrapbook includes British caricatures and other prints, illustrations, clippings from magazines and newspapers, and anything that whoever the creator was, who we don't know, wanted to put in this scrapbook. This is what the book looked like when it arrived. It was certainly well used and well loved. A lot of the prints were damaged, and the pages of the scrapbook were in pretty bad shape. So we had the entire book conserved. We had all of the items removed from the pages, but after they were measured very carefully and photographed. We had them repaired, we had them cleaned. We had new paper commissioned that would match the original scrapbook paper. And then everything after it was digitized was reassembled. So there are lots of political cartoons in this scrapbook, including certainly depictions of Napoleon and French people. But there's also a lot of social satire in these cartoons, which I find really interesting. And I wanted to show my favorite cartoon from this scrapbook. It's from 1790, and it's about Caroline Herschel. She was an astronomer who discovered 8 comets. And she was the first woman known to receive a salary as a scientist. She was paid by the British government. She's also the first woman in England to hold a government position. Now, shortly before this cartoon was published in February, Caroline discovered her 3rd comet. The artist here ridicules her for stepping outside the traditional domestic sphere of women. You can see that the comet is actually farting in her direction, and the moon looks on laughing. She blushes and says, "What a strong sulfurous scent proceeds from this meteor." So the fact that she's depicted as misidentifying the comet as a meteor is also possibly a dig at her competence and her ability to truly understand what she's seeing. But Caroline had the last laugh. She became the first woman to be awarded a gold medal by the Royal Astronomical Society in 1828. And to give you an idea of how far ahead of her time she was, no woman would be given the gold medal again until 1996. She died at the age of 97, a true pioneer female scientist. So I hope you've enjoyed our look at political caricatures from the Revolutionary and Napoleonic eras, and I hope you enjoy taking a look at our digitized version of the Hale scrapbook. Thank you.